Millionaire CEO heard little girl whispered, "Mommy's gone. Please save my brothers." What he did next. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. It was a bitterly cold evening, the kind that made you want to stay inside, where the warmth of a fireplace or a cup of tea could soothe the chill. The city streets were deserted, except for the occasional car speeding by, its headlights cutting through the thick blanket of snow that covered the ground. Caleb Whitmore, a successful billionaire, walked briskly down the street, his face a picture of quiet determination. He had just come from a business meeting that had run late, and now he was heading home to his sleek, empty penthouse. A man of immense wealth and influence, Caleb had everything anyone could ever want. Yet, when he looked around, he saw only emptiness. His life was a series of meetings, phone calls, and work. There was no laughter, no warmth, no sense of belonging. The world outside was alive with holiday cheer. But for Caleb, it was just another lonely night. As he passed an old bench near the park, something caught his attention. He slowed down, a feeling of unease creeping over him. At first, he thought it was just the shadows playing tricks on his mind. But then he heard it. A faint sound, a whimper. He stepped closer, his heart pounding in his chest. There, huddled on the cold bench, was a little girl, no older than 6 or 7. Her face was streaked with tears, her small body trembling against the icy wind. In her arms, she held a small bundle, a baby, wrapped in a thin, worn-out blanket. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. The little girl's voice broke the silence. "Please, don't hurt us," she whispered, her words barely audible against the howling wind. Caleb froze. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. Why was she out here alone, in the freezing cold, with a baby in her arms? Who could do something like this? His instinct was to move, to act, but something held him back. He kneeled down in front of her, trying to offer comfort. "Hey, it's okay. You're safe now," he said softly, his voice shaking slightly. But the little girl only looked at him, her eyes wide with fear. "Mommy's gone. Please, save my brothers," she whispered again, clutching the baby tighter. The words hit Caleb like a punch to the gut. He didn't know what had happened to this child or her family, but he knew one thing. He couldn't leave her, here, alone, in the cold. Without thinking, Caleb picked her up, carefully cradling the baby in his other arm. He felt the weight of the moment settle on him. The responsibility of caring for these children he didn't know, yet felt an undeniable connection to. He was a man who had always prided himself on being in control, but now, in this moment, he felt the raw power of human compassion. He rushed them to his car, not bothering to check if anyone had seen him. He was determined to get them somewhere safe, somewhere warm. The girl continued to cry softly in his arms, her tiny voice a reminder of the pain she had endured. Caleb's mind raced as he drove through the snow, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. Mommy's gone. What had happened to her mother? Why had this little girl been left to fend for herself, in the cold, with a baby sister? He didn't know the answers. But one thing was clear. He wasn't going to let them face this alone. As he drove, the sound of the girl's sobs filled the car, a heartbreaking reminder that there were far too many children like her in the world, children who needed someone to protect them, someone to care. Caleb glanced at the rearview mirror. his eyes meeting the little girl's through the reflection. She was looking at him with a mixture of fear and hope, as if she knew that, somehow, he was her only chance. And as he drove on, Caleb made a silent promise to her, one he would keep no matter what. He would protect her. He would protect her brothers. And he would find out what had happened to their mother. It was the beginning of a journey that would change all of their lives forever. As Caleb rushed through the snowy streets, his heart raced as fast as his car. The little girl, whose name he had yet to learn, clung tightly to her baby sister, her face buried in his coat. He could feel her tiny body trembling, even through the warmth of the car. He glanced back at her in the rearview mirror, her large, dark eyes staring back at him with a mix of fear and uncertainty. It broke his heart to see such fear in a child's eyes. She was so small, and yet, she had already experienced more pain than most adults could ever imagine. Caleb's mind raced with questions. What had happened to this little girl and her family? Why had she been abandoned on the streets, alone in the cold, with no one to protect her? He had to know more. The hospital was only a few miles away, but it felt like an eternity. Every minute that passed, every sob that escaped the girl's lips, made Caleb feel like he was failing her. He needed to get her somewhere safe, somewhere where she could finally feel safe, even if it was just for a moment. He turned onto the hospital's emergency entrance, the bright lights of the building cutting through the darkness of the night. He barely stopped the car before rushing out, opening the back door, and scooping the girl and her baby sister into his arms. The cold air hit him like a slap, but he didn't care. His only focus was getting the children the help they needed. He rushed through the hospital doors, the emergency room staff barely glancing up before they rushed to help. Caleb didn't even have to explain. The girl was in distress, the baby's cries echoing through the sterile halls. A nurse quickly took the baby from Caleb's arms and rushed her down the hallway, while another nurse began to tend to the little girl. "What happened to her?" the nurse asked as she carefully checked the girl's injuries. Caleb hesitated, not sure what to say. She said her mother is gone. She's been living on the streets with her baby sister. The nurse nodded as she guided the little girl onto a stretcher. Caleb could see the fear still in the child's eyes, but she was trying to be brave, clinging to him like he was the only thing keeping her grounded. "You're safe now," Caleb whispered to her, his voice soft, as if hoping she would believe him. He stayed by her side until they wheeled her away to a treatment room. His mind raced, thinking back to the moment when he had found her on that cold bench. The girl's voice echoed in his ears. "Mommy's gone. Please, save my brothers." His heart broke at the thought. Who would do this to a child? Who would leave her in the cold, vulnerable, and alone? He knew there was something deeper to this story, something he had to uncover. The nurse returned moments later, her face filled with concern. "She's stable now. She's just cold and frightened. But we need to make sure there's no underlying trauma. We'll take care of her." Caleb nodded, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. But he wasn't done. Not yet. He had to find out more. "What's her name?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The nurse glanced down at the chart in her hand. "Ava," she said, her voice soft. "Ava," Caleb repeated, committing the name to memory. He didn't know what had happened to her, but he was going to make sure she was safe. Ava and her sister were going to get the help they needed. Caleb's mind raced as he thought about the girl's plea. "Please save my brothers." Had there been other children involved? Where were they now? Who was responsible for their suffering? He knew he couldn't rest until he got answers. Caleb pulled out his phone and dialed his assistant, his fingers trembling as he spoke. "I need you to find out everything you can about a little girl named Ava. She's in the hospital, and I need to know everything about her situation. Her mother is gone, and she's been living on the streets with her baby sister." As the phone rang, Caleb looked back at the treatment room door, where Ava had been taken. He couldn't shake the image of her face. So young, yet so full of pain. This wasn't just about helping one little girl anymore. This was about making sure no other child had to suffer like this again. It was about making sure Ava's story didn't end in tragedy. As he hung up the phone, Caleb felt a deep sense of responsibility settle in his chest. This was no longer just a random encounter. This was fate, and he couldn't walk away from it. He was going to find out what had happened to Ava, and he was going to make sure her life was never the same again. As Caleb waited in the sterile waiting area of the hospital, his mind raced. He kept replaying the moment he found Ava, her tiny body shivering in his arms, clutching her baby sister for dear life. The echo of her voice still rang in his ears. "Mommy's gone. Please, save my brothers." Who would leave a child like that, alone, in the cold? Caleb couldn't stop thinking about it. The questions kept piling up. Where was the mother? And what about her brothers? Why hadn't they been with her? He needed answers, and he needed them now. The nurse had told him that Ava would be okay, that she just needed some warmth and food. But Caleb knew this was only the beginning. He couldn't leave her side, not yet. His assistant called him back with the news he'd been waiting for. "We've found a record for Ava. Her mother's name was Lisa Harrington. She was known to be a single mother, struggling with addiction for several years." Caleb listened intently, his heart sinking with every word. Lisa passed away 6 months ago, from an overdose. Ava and her siblings have been in and out of foster care since then. The words hit Caleb like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just a case of abandonment. It was a tragic cycle of neglect. Ava, and probably her brothers, had been bounced from one foster home to another, never finding the stability they so desperately needed. Caleb's hand clenched into a fist as he sat back in his chair. He thought about the children he had helped over the years, young people he'd given scholarships to, mentorships, and opportunities. But none of that mattered right now. This little girl, Ava, and her siblings needed more than opportunities. They needed a home. They needed someone to fight for them. Caleb's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a social worker, calling him with more information. "Ava's siblings," she said. "They're currently in different foster homes, but we've been unable to locate one of her brothers. He's been missing for over a week." Caleb's breath caught in his throat. Missing. How could this happen? How could a child go missing in the system? He was no longer just a bystander in this situation. Caleb knew he had to do something, and he had to do it now. "I want to meet with the foster families. I need to know where her brothers are," he said, his voice firm. The social worker agreed to set up the meetings. Caleb stood up, walking across the room, his mind already moving toward action. As he approached the door, he hesitated. Ava's face flashed in his mind again, those wide, fearful eyes. He couldn't help but feel a deep sense of responsibility for her brothers. He had to make sure they were safe. But more than that, he had to make sure they knew they were not alone anymore. He could offer them more than just safety. He could offer them love, something they had clearly been lacking. He walked out of the hospital and into the frigid night air, the cold biting at his skin. But it didn't matter. He was on a mission now, a mission that would take him to the homes of strangers, to government buildings, to every place where Ava's siblings could be. He was determined to find them. He couldn't let them slip through the cracks like their mother had. Caleb felt a shift inside him as he drove toward the first foster home. For the first time in years, he felt something other than the hollow ache of loneliness. He felt a sense of purpose, a purpose bigger than his company, bigger than the business deals he'd spent years perfecting. This was about helping these children, giving them a chance at the life they deserved. He thought back to the promise he'd made Ava. "You're safe now. He hadn't realized it at the time, but that promise was only the beginning. The journey ahead was one of healing, redemption, and hopefully, a future full of hope. Caleb's determination grew stronger with every mile that passed. He was ready to do whatever it took to reunite Ava with her brothers and give them a home, a real home, not just a place to sleep. He would fight for them, no matter what it took. Caleb arrived at the first foster home, his heart pounding in his chest as he stepped out of the car. The night air was cold, sharp against his skin, but he hardly noticed. His mind was focused solely on the task at hand, finding Ava's brother, the one who had been missing for over a week. He had to find him. He had promised Ava that she and her brothers would be safe, and he would do whatever it took to keep that promise. He walked up to the door of the small house and rang the bell. The door opened slowly, and a woman in her mid-40s stood in front of him. Her face was kind but weary, her eyes tired from the weight of the world she carried as a foster parent. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice soft but cautious. Caleb straightened his posture and looked her in the eye. "I'm Caleb Whitmore. I'm here about a boy named Jackson, Ava's brother." The woman's face shifted slightly, a flicker of recognition crossing her features. She stepped back and motioned for him to come inside. "Please, come in," she said, leading him through the small entryway into the living room. The house was modest, the walls adorned with pictures of the children she had taken in over the years. It wasn't luxurious, but it had warmth, something that had been lacking in the children's lives for too long. Caleb took a seat on the couch, his nerves on edge, as the woman settled into a chair across from him. "Jackson has been staying with us for the past few months," she said, her hands folded in her lap. "He's a sweet boy, but he's been through a lot. After his mother passed away, he became withdrawn, not wanting to talk to anyone. He and Ava were very close. I think they were each other's only comfort after everything they lost." Caleb nodded, his heart heavy as he listened. "What happened a week ago? Why is he missing?" he asked, his voice low. The woman's eyes darkened, and she let out a sigh. "Jackson had a breakdown," she explained. "He couldn't take the pain anymore. He wanted to run away. He left the house in the middle of the night, and we haven't seen him since." Caleb felt his chest tighten. He had to find Jackson. He couldn't let this boy be out there alone, especially with the dangers that lurked in the world. "Have you contacted the authorities?" Caleb asked urgently. "Of course we have," she replied, "but they haven't found anything. We've put up flyers, contacted friends, but there's been no sign of him. It's like he just disappeared." Caleb stood up, pacing the room. He couldn't sit still. Jackson was out there, somewhere, alone, scared. Caleb had to do something. He couldn't rely on the authorities alone. He had to take matters into his own hands. He turned to the woman. "I'm going to find him," Caleb said, determination in his voice. "I don't care what it takes. I'm going to find him and bring him home." The woman looked at him with a mixture of hope and doubt. "You don't even know where to start," she said softly. "How will you find him?" Caleb paused, thinking. Then, he turned to the woman with a resolute expression. "I'll start with what I know. He's been through so much. He doesn't trust anyone right now. But Ava, she's the key. If anyone can help me find him, it's her. She knows her brother better than anyone." The woman nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You're right," she said. "Ava is strong. She's always been there for Jackson. Maybe, just maybe, you can bring them back together." Caleb left the foster home with a new sense of urgency. He knew he couldn't waste any more time. Ava had already been through so much. But Jackson, her brother, was still out there, lost and alone. Caleb drove back to the hospital, His mind focused on one thing: finding Jackson. He was going to keep his promise. He was going to save these children from the darkness they had been living in. He wasn't going to stop until they were both safe, until he had reunited them and given them the family they had lost. The search for Jackson had just begun, and Caleb knew that he wouldn't rest until he found him. Caleb arrived back at the hospital, his mind set on finding Jackson. He walked briskly through the doors, past the sterile white walls and flickering fluorescent lights, his focus unwavering. Ava was still in her room, recovering, and Caleb knew that the time had come to speak with her, to try to unlock the one piece of information that could lead him to her brother. As he entered her room, he found her sitting up in bed, a bowl of warm soup in front of her. Her small hands were wrapped around the bowl, but her eyes were distant, as if she was thinking about something far away. When she saw Caleb, she looked up, a faint, cautious smile crossing her face. "Mr. Whitmore," she said softly, her voice still shaky from the trauma she had endured. "Are you okay?" Caleb took a step closer, sitting in the chair beside her bed. "I'm fine, Ava," he said gently, "but I need to ask you something important." Ava's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but she nodded, her grip on the soup bowl tightening. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Caleb hesitated for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Ava, I need to know where Jackson is. He's your brother, right?" Ava's face fell, the warmth in her eyes replaced by a deep sadness. She nodded slowly, her small voice trembling as she spoke. "I haven't seen him in days," she whispered. "He was upset when Mommy died, when they took us away from each other. He ran away." Caleb's heart ached for the girl. He could see the pain in her eyes, the overwhelming sense of loss that had taken root deep inside her. "Do you know where he might have gone?" he asked gently, hoping she could offer some clue. Ava's eyes darted to the side, as if she were searching her memories for something that might help. "He used to go to the old park," she said finally. "It's where we used to play when we were little, before everything changed." Caleb nodded, his mind already racing. The old park was a few miles away, a place that had once been full of joy for the children, before their world had been turned upside down. He knew where it was, and he could make it there in less than 15 minutes. "Thank you, Ava," he said softly, standing up. "You've helped more than you know." Ava looked up at him, her eyes wide with hope. "You'll find him, right?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Caleb's chest tightened. "I will," he said firmly, his voice resolute. "I promise you, Ava. I'm not going to stop until he's safe." Ava's small hand reached out to him, and Caleb gently took it, feeling the fragile trust she was placing in him. He gave her a reassuring smile, then turned and left the room, his mind fixed on one goal: finding Jackson. The drive to the park felt like an eternity. The streets blurred around him as he sped through the quiet town, the cold night air seeping through the cracks in the car's windows. He didn't have much time. Jackson could be anywhere. But Caleb wasn't going to give up. Not now, not after everything. He couldn't leave this child, or the others, in the dark. They deserved better. As Caleb pulled into the parking lot of the park, he looked around. The place was deserted, the swings swaying gently in the wind, the once vibrant playground now silent and abandoned. He scanned the area, his eyes searching for any sign of Jackson. He knew that if the boy was here, he wouldn't be easy to find. Jackson was scared, confused, and angry. He wouldn't trust anyone easily. Caleb stepped out of the car, his heart pounding as he walked deeper into the park, past the rusted slides and empty benches. He called out softly, hoping for an answer. "Jackson?" he said, his voice carrying across the empty space. It's Caleb. I'm here to help you. For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. Caleb's footsteps echoed in the silence. He kept calling out, his voice growing louder with each step. Jackson, it's okay. You don't have to be scared anymore. We're going to take care of you. Just as Caleb was about to turn back, he heard a faint rustling in the bushes. His heart skipped a beat. He turned quickly, his eyes locking onto a figure emerging from the shadows. There, standing a few feet away, was a boy. His clothes were ragged, his face pale, but there was no mistaking it. It was Jackson. The boy looked at him, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. Caleb took a slow step forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. Jackson, he said gently, it's okay. I'm here to help you. Jackson took a step back, his eyes darting around, as if searching for an escape. I don't want to go back, he whispered, his voice trembling. Caleb's heart broke for the boy. He stepped closer, trying to calm him down. You don't have to go back, Jackson. You're safe now. We're going to make sure you're okay. Slowly, Jackson's guard began to lower. He stopped retreating, his eyes filled with a mix of exhaustion and hope. Caleb took another step forward, this time closer, until he was standing right in front of the boy. You're not alone anymore, Caleb said softly. You've got me, and you've got your sister. We're going to make everything right. Jackson finally let out a soft sob, his small body shaking as the floodgates of emotion opened. Caleb pulled him into his arms, holding him close, feeling the weight of everything that had been lost, but also the possibility of something new. A new chance. A new family. He whispered into Jackson's ear, You're safe now. You're home. Caleb knew this was just the beginning. But for the first time, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. As Caleb walked back to his car with Jackson in tow, he felt the weight of the moment settle in. He had found the boy, the brother who had been missing for so long. But this was far from over. The road ahead would be long and uncertain. He had made a promise to these children, and now he had to see it through. Jackson was silent beside him, his small hand clutched tightly in Caleb's. The boy was still trembling, his body exhausted from the days of fear and confusion. But Caleb could see a flicker of trust beginning to form in his eyes. Jackson had finally let go of the walls he'd built around himself, and for the first time in a long while, he was starting to believe in the possibility of safety. Caleb opened the car door, guiding Jackson in and buckling him in before climbing into the driver's seat. The engine hummed softly, the headlights cutting through the darkened night as they drove back to the hospital where Ava was waiting. Caleb's mind was filled with questions. What would happen now? What was best for these kids? He had the resources to help them, but he knew that this wasn't just about providing a roof over their heads. It was about offering them something far more valuable. Love, stability, and a chance at a future they hadn't even dared to imagine. He glanced over at Jackson, who was staring out the window, his small frame slumped in the seat. Caleb knew it would take time for him to heal, to truly believe that this wasn't just another temporary stop on a journey of abandonment. But Caleb was determined to make it different. As he pulled into the hospital parking lot, Caleb's phone rang. He looked at the screen, his assistant. Mr. Whitmore, the voice on the other end said, We've managed to locate the remaining brother, Michael. He's in a foster home nearby. I've set up a meeting with the social worker in charge. They'll be expecting you in the morning. Caleb felt a sense of relief wash over him. He wasn't done yet. There was still work to be done, but knowing that all three children would soon be together gave him hope. He hung up the phone, his thoughts turning back to Ava. The promise he'd made to her still lingered in his mind. She and her brothers would be safe. He wouldn't stop until that promise was fulfilled. They all needed a family, and Caleb knew that he could give them that. But it was going to take more than just good intentions. It would require hard work, patience, and a deep commitment to seeing them through their pain. He walked into the hospital, Jackson's hand still in his, and made his way to Ava's room. She was awake, sitting up in bed, her eyes lighting up when she saw her brother. "Jackson!" she cried, a smile breaking through her tired face. "You found him," she whispered, her voice full of disbelief. Caleb smiled, kneeling down beside her bed. "I promised I would," he said softly. Jackson stood still for a moment, watching his sister, before he slowly walked over to her side, sitting down on the bed next to her. The two siblings exchanged a quiet, tentative hug, and for the first time, in what felt like forever, there was a sense of peace between them. Caleb stood up, watching them, a sense of fulfillment spreading through him. This was just the beginning, but it was a start. Ava and Jackson, the siblings who had been torn apart by circumstances, were together again. Now it was time to bring Michael into the fold, to make sure they had everything they needed to heal. But Caleb was no longer alone in this. He had promised to fight for them, and he was going to keep that promise. They weren't just his responsibility now, they were his family, and he would do whatever it took to make sure they had a future filled with love, hope, and safety. The road ahead would be long, but Caleb knew that, together, they could face whatever came their way. For the first time in a long time, he felt something he hadn't in years: hope. And he knew that, no matter what, he would never let these children go through life alone again. The next morning, Caleb stood in the dimly lit social services office, his thoughts swirling with uncertainty. He had tracked down Michael, the last of the three siblings, and now he was about to meet the foster parents who had been caring for him. Caleb had never been nervous before. His confidence was built on years of business meetings, high-stakes decisions, and complicated negotiations. But this was different. This was about the future of three children, children who had been abandoned, neglected, and lost for far too long. And Caleb knew that it was up to him to change that. The social worker greeted him with a calm smile, but Caleb could see the underlying tension in her eyes. She understood the gravity of this meeting, too. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm glad you could make it," she said, leading him down a narrow hallway toward the small room where Michael was staying. Caleb followed, his footsteps echoing in the silence. "How is he doing?" he asked, his voice low. The social worker sighed. "Michael is a bit withdrawn. He doesn't talk much about his past, but he's been through a lot. Losing his mother, then being separated from his siblings. It's been hard on him, but he's a good kid. He's just scared." Caleb nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. He had already seen the fear in Ava and Jackson's eyes, the trauma that had shaped their young lives. But Michael, Caleb wasn't sure what he would find. Would he be as closed off as the others had been? Or was there a chance, just a small chance, that this boy could still find a way back to hope? As they reached the door, the social worker knocked softly before pushing it open. Caleb stepped inside, his gaze immediately falling on Michael. The boy was sitting at the small table in the corner of the room, his back hunched, staring out the window. He was thin, his clothes slightly too big for him, and his face looked like he'd been through more pain than anyone his age should ever experience. But there was something in his eyes that Caleb couldn't ignore, a flicker of something that reminded him of Ava and Jackson, a silent plea for help. The social worker introduced Caleb to Michael in a gentle voice, but the boy didn't respond. He simply stared, his expression unreadable. Caleb took a deep breath and sat down at the table, a little distance away from Michael. He didn't want to push too hard. Not yet. He knew that trust had to be earned. and that meant being patient. Michael, Caleb began, his voice soft but steady. I'm Caleb. I'm here to help you, and I want to make sure that you're okay. The boy didn't say anything at first. He just looked out the window, his shoulders tense. But Caleb could see him listening, could feel the boy's attention shifting toward him. I know things have been hard, Caleb continued, his heart aching for the boy. But I want you to know that you're not alone anymore. You've got me, and you've got your sister and brother. We're all going to be a family. Michael's eyes flickered for a moment, and Caleb could see the tiniest hint of hope starting to take root. But it was still buried deep. Caleb didn't push him. Instead, he waited, letting the silence fill the room. After a long pause, Michael finally spoke, his voice quiet but clear. I don't want to go back to the foster home, he whispered. They don't care about me. Caleb felt his chest tighten. He didn't know what had happened at the foster home, but it was clear that Michael had been let down by the system, just like his siblings. Caleb reached across the table, placing his hand gently on the boy's. You don't have to go back there, Caleb said firmly. I promise you, Michael, I will take care of you. You're coming with me. You and your siblings are going to have a home, a real home, where you're loved and safe. Michael looked up at him, his eyes filled with doubt. You can't promise that, he said, his voice shaking slightly. People always leave. Caleb squeezed his hand, his voice filled with quiet conviction. I'm not going anywhere, Michael. I'm not leaving you. You're part of my family now, and that's something I will never break. For the first time, Michael's eyes softened, and Caleb saw the smallest glimmer of trust in his gaze. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Caleb knew that this wasn't going to be easy. Rebuilding trust, healing the wounds of abandonment and neglect, these things took time. But as he looked into Michael's eyes, he knew that they were on the right path. He wasn't just giving these children a place to stay. He was giving them a chance to heal, a chance to rebuild their lives. And no matter how long it took, Caleb was committed to being there for them, every step of the way. The days that followed were a whirlwind of paperwork, appointments, and small steps toward rebuilding the lives of the three siblings. Caleb had done everything in his power to ensure that Jackson, Michael, and Ava were safe. But now, the real work began. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Healing from the trauma they had endured would take time, but Caleb was determined to help them. He had made a promise, and he would keep it. Caleb's first priority was to ensure they had a stable home. He contacted a lawyer and arranged for temporary guardianship over the children. The foster system had failed them, and he wasn't about to let them slip through the cracks again. He found a quiet, comfortable home in the suburbs, far from the noise and distractions of the city. It was a place where the children could begin to heal, where they could find peace. The house was modest, but it had everything they needed: a small yard, a cozy living room, and enough space for all three children. Caleb wanted to create an environment where they could feel secure, where they could begin to trust again. But even in the safety of their new home, Caleb knew it would take time for the children to feel truly at ease. Ava had started to open up a little more. She was still quiet, still carrying the weight of her past, but Caleb could see glimpses of the happy, carefree girl she once was. Jackson, on the other hand, was still struggling. He would often retreat into his room, lost in his own world. Caleb didn't push him. He knew Jackson needed time, but he also made sure to be there for him, offering a comforting presence whenever the boy needed it. Michael was somewhere in between. He was shy and reserved, but Caleb could see the potential for something more. He wasn't the angry, withdrawn boy he had been when Caleb first met him, but there was still a distance between them. Caleb spent time with each of the children, individually and as a group. They would sit together in the living room, playing games, talking about their day, or just being present. Slowly, they began to trust him. Slowly, they began to heal. One afternoon, as Caleb was sitting on the couch with Ava, she spoke up. "Mr. Whitmore, do you think we'll ever be okay again?" The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of her fear. Caleb looked at her, his heart aching. He wanted to tell her that everything would be okay, that all the pain would disappear, but he knew better. Healing wasn't that simple. Instead, he took her hand in his and said, "Ava, I can't promise that everything will be perfect, but I can promise that you'll never be alone again. I'll always be here for you, and so will Jackson and Michael. You're not just surviving anymore, you're living, and that means something." Ava looked at him, her eyes wide with uncertainty. "But what if we mess up?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if we ruin everything again?" Caleb smiled softly. "We all make mistakes, Ava. It's part of being human. But what matters is that we keep trying. We don't give up, and we don't do it alone." Ava's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, Caleb thought she might pull away. But instead, she leaned into him, allowing herself to feel the comfort of his presence. "Thank you," she whispered. Caleb squeezed her hand, a quiet promise between them. As he sat there with Ava, watching the sun begin to set through the window, Caleb felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey wasn't over. Not by a long shot, but they were on the right path. Each day brought new challenges, new moments of doubt, but it also brought moments of joy. Small victories, like when Jackson smiled for the first time in days, or when Michael laughed at a joke. These were the moments that made it all worth it. The following week, Caleb arranged for the children to see a counselor. He knew that professional help was necessary for them to truly heal, but he also made sure that they knew they didn't have to go through it alone. The counselor was kind and understanding, and she made the children feel comfortable enough to start talking about their past. It wasn't easy, but Caleb stayed close by, supporting them every step of the way. One afternoon, as he was getting ready to leave for a meeting, he found Michael sitting at the kitchen table, drawing quietly. The boy had started drawing again, something Caleb hadn't seen him do since they first met. "What are you drawing, Michael?" Caleb asked gently. Michael looked up, his eyes shy but curious. "It's a house," he said, his voice barely audible. "A house with a big yard. A place where we can all be together." Caleb's heart swelled with emotion. For the first time, Michael was imagining a future that didn't involve fear or abandonment, a future with hope. "That sounds like a beautiful house," Caleb said softly. "I think that's exactly what we're building here." Michael smiled. The first real smile Caleb had seen from him in a long time, and in that moment, Caleb knew that they were all on the road to recovery. It wouldn't be easy, but with each other's support, they would find their way. Caleb felt more certain than ever that this was where he was meant to be, with these children who had become his family. Together, they would create a new future, one full of love, hope, and healing. Weeks had passed since Caleb had brought the three siblings into his home, and things were beginning to settle into a new rhythm. The house, once quiet and filled with the ghosts of the past, now echoed with laughter and the sounds of children playing. Ava, Jackson, and Michael were slowly finding their footing in this new world, and Caleb couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment watching them grow. It wasn't without its challenges, of course. Michael still struggled with his trust, often retreating into himself when the world became too overwhelming. But he was opening up, little by little, starting to find comfort in the stability Caleb had worked so hard to provide. Jackson, too, had made strides. He smiled more now, though his laughter was still rare. But Caleb knew it would come. It was just a matter of time. And then there was Ava, who had become the heart of the family. She had taken to her new role with such grace and maturity, always looking out for her brothers, making sure they felt safe and loved. It was in the quiet moments that Caleb saw the most progress. The way Michael would sit at the table with crayons in hand, drawing pictures of their family, or how Jackson would come down the stairs with a grin when he saw Caleb preparing breakfast. It was the little things that let Caleb know they were beginning to heal. One afternoon, as Caleb was finishing up some work in the living room, he heard a knock on the door. He looked up, surprised. It was early for visitors, but when he opened the door, he was greeted by a familiar face, the social worker, who had helped connect him with the children. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm sorry to bother you," she said, her face serious. "But there's something you need to know." Caleb's stomach dropped. "What is it?" he asked, his voice tense. The social worker hesitated for a moment before speaking. "There's been some concern from the state. They're reviewing your guardianship situation and the possibility of an adoption hearing. They want to see how things are progressing with the children, and they've scheduled a meeting with you next week." Caleb's heart raced. He had known this day might come, but hearing it out loud made it all feel so real. He had made a home for these children, a place where they could finally feel safe, loved, and wanted. But now the system was stepping in, evaluating whether he was the right person to provide for them permanently. "I understand," Caleb said, trying to keep his voice calm. "What do I need to do?" I am, Caleb said. I am. The meeting will be a formal review," the social worker explained. "They'll want to know how the children are adjusting, their progress, and how well they're settling into their new life. It's important that you show them how much you've done for these kids and how committed you are to their future." Caleb nodded, trying to absorb everything she had said. "Thank you for letting me know. I'll be prepared for the meeting." The social worker gave him a sympathetic smile before leaving, but Caleb couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in his chest. He knew he had done everything he could for these children, but the thought of losing them, of having them taken away after all they had been through, made his stomach churn. He needed them. He couldn't imagine his life without them. The next few days were filled with a mix of emotions, nervousness, uncertainty, and a deep, gnawing worry. Caleb made sure to be there for the children, to show them that they were still safe, still loved. He took them on walks, spent evenings playing board games, and even took them to the park on Saturday mornings. It was the simple things that helped them heal, the moments of normalcy they so desperately needed. But as the meeting drew closer, Caleb felt the pressure weighing on him. He knew he had done everything right, but that didn't make the process any easier. The day of the meeting arrived, and Caleb found himself sitting nervously in a small conference room at the social services office. He had gathered all the necessary documents, school reports, medical records, and notes from the counselor who had been helping the children. He had done his homework, but nothing could prepare him for the nerves he felt sitting there, waiting for the state officials to walk in. When they finally entered the room, Caleb stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. There were two of them, an older woman who looked like she had seen a lot in her years in social services, and a younger man, fresh out of law school, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Whitmore," the woman began, "thank you for coming in today. We're here to review the situation with the children. I understand that you've made a lot of progress in their care." Caleb nodded, trying to remain calm. "I've done everything I can to provide for them. They've been through a lot, but they're starting to heal. They're becoming a family again." The woman looked at the younger man, who nodded and jotted something down on his clipboard before turning his attention back to Caleb. "We've seen the reports, Mr. Whitmore, but we need to hear from you directly. What's your plan for the children moving forward?" Caleb took a deep breath. He knew this was his moment. The moment he could prove that he was the right person for these kids. He wasn't just a businessman, a man with resources. He was a man who cared. "I'm committed to them," he said, his voice steady. "I want to give them a stable, loving home. I know it won't be easy. They've been through more than any child should ever have to go through. But I'm here for them, and I will be here for as long as they need me." The room fell silent for a moment. Caleb's words hung in the air, raw and honest. And then, slowly, the woman nodded. "We'll take that into consideration, Mr. Whitmore. Thank you for your time." The meeting ended shortly after, and Caleb walked out of the office feeling a mix of exhaustion and hope. He had done everything he could. Now, all he could do was wait. Days passed, and Caleb found himself replaying the meeting over and over in his mind. The words of the social worker and the state officials echoed in his head, each sentence a reminder that nothing was guaranteed. He had done everything he could to show that he was the right person to take care of the children, but now all he could do was wait. It felt like a lifetime. Ava, Jackson, and Michael were still adjusting, still finding their place in this new life. Ava had started to help around the house more, taking on the role of a big sister with ease. Though there were moments when Caleb could see the sadness in her eyes. She was still haunted by the memories of the past, but she was strong, and Caleb was proud of her. Jackson, too, had started to show signs of healing. He wasn't as withdrawn as he had been in the beginning. He still had his quiet moments, but now he was more willing to engage with the others, to join in games and conversations. Caleb could see the shift, the small steps forward. Michael was still the most hesitant. He had come a long way since the first day Caleb brought him into his home, but he still held back, still clung to the fear that at any moment things might change again. Caleb understood, of course. Michael had been let down by so many people in his life already. But Caleb was determined to show him that this was different. This time, Michael wasn't going to be left behind. The day of the follow-up meeting finally arrived. Caleb's stomach was in knots as he prepared for the next step in this journey. The children were at school, and Caleb was left to face the final piece of the puzzle. He had already spent the morning reviewing all the documents again, making sure everything was in order. It wasn't just about proving he could provide a home, it was about showing the system that he was ready for the responsibility of raising these children, giving them the stability they needed to heal. As Caleb drove to the social services office, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation bearing down on him. This wasn't just about a legal meeting. It was about their future, about whether or not they would remain together as a family. He couldn't lose them. They had become a part of him, and he had come to love them as his own. Walking into the office, Caleb was greeted by the same social worker from before. Her face was warm, but there was still a professionalism in her demeanor that made Caleb nervous. "Mr. Whitmore, thank you for coming in today," she said as she ushered him into the conference room. The other state officials were already seated, papers and documents spread out in front of them. Caleb sat down, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. He wasn't going to let his nerves show. He had to remain calm, focused. The meeting began with the same routine questions about the children's adjustment to their new home, how they were doing in school, how they had been coping with their past trauma. Caleb answered each question as honestly and thoughtfully as he could, describing how the children had made progress, how they were starting to feel more secure, more at ease. He spoke of the therapy sessions they had been attending, the small victories he had witnessed over the past few weeks. "They're starting to come out of their shells," Caleb explained, his voice steady. "They're beginning to trust again. Not just me, but each other. They're building a family, one step at a time. The social worker nodded, making notes as Caleb spoke. There were moments when she looked at him with an expression of approval, but there were also moments when she looked at the others in the room, her face unreadable. Caleb couldn't tell if that meant they were satisfied or if they were still uncertain. The questions continued, but Caleb answered each one with confidence. He spoke of the changes he had made to the home, the way he had made sure the children had their own space, a place where they could feel safe. He talked about how he made time for them, how he had become a constant in their lives, showing them that they could rely on him. And then, finally, the question came. "Mr. Whitmore," the older woman said, her voice measured, "do you understand the responsibility that comes with this? Raising children is a lifelong commitment. Are you ready for that responsibility? Not just today, but for the years to come." Caleb paused, taking a deep breath. This was the moment. He couldn't hesitate. He couldn't second-guess himself. "Yes," he said firmly, looking each of them in the eye. "I'm ready. I understand the responsibility, and I'm committed to these children for as long as they need me. I'm not just their guardian. I'm their family, and I will be there for them, no matter what." The room was silent for a moment. Caleb could feel the weight of their scrutiny, but he stood his ground. He had said what needed to be said, and now all he could do was wait. Finally, the social worker spoke again. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. We will take everything into consideration and let you know the next steps." Caleb nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. The meeting ended shortly after that, and Caleb left the office, his mind racing. He had done everything he could. Now, he just had to wait. He drove home in a daze, his thoughts swirling. Would the children stay with him? Would they finally be a family? He didn't know, but he was determined to keep fighting for them, no matter what it took. The days following the meeting with the state officials were a blur of anxiety and anticipation. Caleb kept his distance from the children, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy in their lives while his mind raced with uncertainty. He had done everything in his power to prove he was the right person to take care of them. He had given them a home, shown them love, and worked tirelessly to help them heal from the trauma they had endured. But despite all of that, the lingering question remained. Would the state allow him to keep them? The waiting was unbearable. Caleb spent hours pacing around the house, replaying every moment from the meeting in his mind. Had he said enough? Had he convinced them he was the best option for the children? What if they decided he wasn't enough? The thought of losing them was almost too much to bear. He knew he was doing everything right, but the reality of the system was never simple. He couldn't control what they would decide, and that fear gnawed at him. Ava, Jackson, and Michael, meanwhile, seemed to be unaware of the looming uncertainty. Ava had grown more open, more trusting, though Caleb still noticed the shadow of her past, lingering behind her smile. Jackson was more expressive now, often found laughing at something small or sharing a thought he had kept to himself. Michael had started to speak up more, though he still retreated when things felt too overwhelming. But in their own ways, they were adjusting, and Caleb was proud of their resilience. The morning finally came when the call came through. Caleb stood by the phone, his hand trembling slightly as he picked up. "Mr. Whitmore?" The voice on the other end was calm, professional. "Yes. This is Caleb. This is Sarah, from the Department of Children and Family Services. We've reviewed the case, and we'd like to inform you that the decision has been made." Caleb's heart skipped a beat. He had to fight to keep his voice steady. "And?" There was a pause on the other end before Sarah spoke again. "We've decided to move forward with permanent guardianship. The children will remain with you, and we will begin the process of adoption." Caleb felt a rush of emotion flood over him. The relief was overwhelming, and for a moment, he couldn't find the words to respond. "Mr. Whitmore?" Sarah's voice broke through his dazed thoughts. "Yes, I'm here," Caleb said, his voice thick. "Thank you. Thank you so much." "You've done an excellent job with them," Sarah said warmly. "We believe this is the best place for the children. The process will take some time, but we'll work with you every step of the way." Caleb's mind was reeling, but he managed to gather his thoughts. "I'll do whatever it takes. I won't let them down." "We believe in you, Mr. Whitmore," Sarah said before ending the call. Caleb stood there for a moment, the phone still pressed to his ear, the words sinking in. It was official. They were his. Ava, Jackson, and Michael were staying with him. They were his family now. The emotions hit him all at once. Relief, joy, a deep sense of gratitude. But alongside that, there was also a deep sense of responsibility. They were his to protect, to care for, and to love. Caleb wasn't just their guardian now. He was their father. He let the words sink in. Father. He'd never expected to be in this position. But now that he was, he couldn't imagine anything more important than these children. He looked at the clock and realized it was still early. He couldn't wait. He needed to tell them. He walked quickly to the living room, where the kids were playing a board game, their laughter filling the room. Ava looked up first, a bright smile on her face. "Hey, Mr. Whitmore, we're almost done with the game," she said. Caleb took a deep breath and smiled. "Actually, I've got something to tell you," he said, his voice full of emotion. The children stopped and looked at him, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "You're not going anywhere," Caleb said, his voice firm but full of warmth. "The state has decided that you're staying with me. You're officially my kids now. We're going to start the adoption process." There was a moment of stunned silence, and then Ava's face lit up. She stood up, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Really?" she whispered. Caleb nodded, his own eyes beginning to well with tears. "Really?" Ava ran to him, throwing her arms around him in a tight hug. Jackson and Michael followed suit, both of them coming to him with wide smiles and a sense of joy that Caleb hadn't seen before. Jackson whispered, "We get to stay here?" Caleb nodded again, his heart swelling. "Yes, your home, your family." It was in that moment that Caleb knew this was the beginning of something beautiful. It wouldn't be easy. There would be struggles, challenges, and moments of doubt. But together, they would face it all. They had a home now. They had each other. And for the first time in a long time, Caleb felt a sense of peace. He wasn't just giving these children a home. They were giving him one, too. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had led them here. And this was only the beginning. The weeks following the official confirmation that Caleb would be adopting Ava, Jackson, and Michael were filled with a sense of joy and relief, but also with the understanding that the work wasn't over. The children were adjusting to their new life, but the scars of their past would take time to heal. Caleb was committed to giving them everything they needed to feel safe and loved. But he knew the road ahead would be long. The children had settled into a new routine, with school, therapy sessions, and moments of peace at home. Caleb made sure that their days were filled with both structure and warmth. He helped them with homework, attended parent-teacher conferences, and made sure they had time to play and just be kids. There were still moments of doubt. Michael, while showing progress, still carried the weight of his past, his hesitance sometimes slipping into silence. But Caleb didn't push him. He gave him space and patience, knowing that, in time, Michael would find his way. Jackson, too, was making strides. He had begun to open up more, sharing stories of his past with Caleb during quiet moments. It was clear that he was still afraid of being abandoned. But the smiles he shared with his siblings showed that he was starting to believe in the possibility of stability. Ava, always the caretaker, had taken it upon herself to be the emotional glue that held them all together. Caleb noticed the way she would look after her brothers, making sure they were okay before thinking of herself. It broke his heart to see how much responsibility she had taken on at such a young age, but he was determined to remind her that she didn't have to bear that burden alone. One Saturday afternoon, Caleb took the children to the park. It had become one of their favorite spots, a place where they could escape for a while and just be kids. As they played together, Caleb couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come. He watched Jackson running with a ball, laughing freely with Michael, while Ava swung high on the swings, her face bright with joy. For a moment, it felt as though the pain of the past had melted away. But as Caleb sat on the bench, watching his children, his mind turned to the future. He had made a promise to them that he would be there for them, no matter what. He knew that there would still be difficult days ahead, days when the memories of the past would creep back in. But for the first time in a long time, Caleb felt truly hopeful. This was their new beginning. As they left the park and headed back to the car, Caleb caught sight of a familiar face walking toward him. It was the social worker who had first introduced him to the children. She smiled when she saw him, her eyes warm with approval. "Mr. Whitmore," she greeted him. "I just wanted to check in. I've been hearing great things about how the kids are doing." Caleb smiled, grateful for the support. "They're doing well," he said. "It's been a challenge, but they're adjusting. They're starting to heal." The social worker nodded. "I'm glad to hear that. I know it hasn't been easy for them, but they're lucky to have you." Caleb's heart swelled at her words. It was the first time someone had referred to him as their father, even if just in passing, and it felt like a validation of everything he had worked so hard for. "I'm just doing what any parent would do," Caleb said, his voice thick with emotion. "They're my kids. I'll do whatever it takes to help them." The social worker's eyes softened. "And I believe you will. They've been through so much, but you've created a safe space for them. You're giving them what they need to heal. And that's the most important thing." Caleb nodded, feeling a wave of pride wash over him. He had been through so much in his own life, but nothing had ever felt as rewarding as this being the father these kids needed. As the social worker left, Caleb turned to see Ava, Jackson, and Michael standing together at the car, waiting for him. He could see the joy in their eyes, the way they had come to trust him, the way they now felt at home. And for the first time, Caleb realized that he had created something that was more than just a roof over their heads. It was a family. It was everything he had ever wanted, everything he had fought for. The days ahead would still bring challenges, but Caleb was ready for them. They were ready for them. Together, they could face anything. As they drove home, Caleb looked in the rearview mirror and saw the three children laughing, teasing each other, and living in the moment. He smiled to himself, knowing that no matter what the future held, they were no longer alone. They had each other, and that was all that mattered. As time passed, Caleb's life with Ava, Jackson, and Michael felt more and more like a dream he never wanted to wake from. The once empty house had transformed into a home full of laughter, warmth, and the sounds of children running around, creating memories. The pain of the past still lingered, but Caleb saw it in their eyes, less and less each day. Ava had become a bright, compassionate young girl, full of hope for the future. She had taken on her new role as big sister with grace. But Caleb had made sure she knew that she didn't have to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders anymore. She smiled more often now, and her laughter filled the rooms like music. Jackson, who had once been closed off and full of fear, was beginning to trust again. He smiled more, and his quiet moments were fewer. He shared stories of his past with Caleb, slowly working through the pain that had haunted him for so long. But perhaps the most profound transformation was in Michael. The boy who had been so withdrawn, so fearful, was starting to open up. Michael found solace in drawing, often sketching pictures of the family he had always dreamed of, pictures of them together, happy and safe. It wasn't perfect, but every small step forward was a victory. Caleb had kept his promise to the children, and he knew that the road ahead would still have its challenges. But every day, they grew closer. Every day, they healed a little more. And as the seasons changed, so did they. The weather had grown warmer, and the days were longer. Caleb decided it was time for a family vacation. He'd planned it carefully, wanting it to be a memorable experience, a moment where they could all truly be together without the weight of the past hanging over them. He packed the car, excited to see the children's faces light up as they prepared for the trip. When they finally arrived at the cabin by the lake, the kids couldn't contain their excitement. The area was peaceful, surrounded by towering trees and the calm waters of the lake, an idyllic setting for the healing they all needed. The cabin was simple, but it was cozy, with a fireplace in the living room and a big front porch that looked out onto the lake. It felt like the perfect place to make new memories. Caleb spent the days fishing with Jackson and Michael, teaching them how to cast their lines into the water, laughing when the fish were too quick to catch. Ava spent her time by the lake, writing in her journal, and sometimes Caleb would find her sketching the trees or the shimmering water. The evenings were spent by the fire, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories. Caleb realized, as he watched them all around him, that they were no longer just surviving. They were truly living. The bond between them had deepened, and it felt like this was exactly where they were meant to be. They were a family, built not just on blood, but on trust, love, and the strength they had found in each other. One evening, as the sun set over the lake, casting golden light across the water, Caleb sat on the porch, watching his children. They were running around the yard, laughing, their voices carried by the wind. He closed his eyes for a moment, taking it all in: the sound of their laughter, the warmth of the setting sun, the peace that now filled his life. This was the family he had always dreamed of. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Caleb knew that this was just the beginning. They still had a long road ahead, with more healing to come, more memories to create, and more challenges to face. But for the first time, he felt truly at peace. He wasn't just the man who had saved these children from a broken system. He was their father, their protector, their home, and nothing could take that away. As he looked at the three children he had come to love more than anything, he knew one thing for certain. This was the family he was meant to have. He had found them, and they had found him. Together, they were unstoppable. And for the first time in his life, Caleb understood the true meaning of home.